Hello and welcome to our podcast at Get Legally Speaking. Our legal conversation today will be about crimes against women, covering aspects of law around sexual assault. I am here today with Senior Barrister and Judge Miss Gillian Jones QC from Red Lion Chambers in London. Gillian is joint head of her chambers and is described as being a brilliant practitioner who is fabulous and absolutely faultless, and also as having an incisive legal mind which enables her to cut rapidly to the crux of the issues in the most complex cases. Many of Gillian's cases are well known with a global reach. Thank you for joining us, Gillian.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, Gillian. Absolute pleasure. Right, crimes against women, very, very serious topic. I think I just mentioned to you as I ran in earlier this morning that it's not a fluffy, cuddly area of law. And there are some really interesting questions that we'll be discussing. The first question that we're going to look at today is what happens if I report rape or sexual assault to the police?
Well, if you are somebody who's decided to report a sexual assault to the police are likely to have 4 questions that they want you to answer. Who did this? What happened? When did it happen? And where did it happen? You might not be able to answer all of them, but don't let that put you off. Go ahead, and all you can do is the best you can to recall everything about what happened to you.
Yes.
And if the police can identify and locate the subject, then obviously they may well go and arrest them. The decision whether to make an arrest is to be based both on your wishes, but also what the police think about the wider public interest. Because obviously it's in their interest to ensure if somebody is dangerous and that they're arrested, and if there's any likely threat to others, obviously they're going to want to make sure they can get that person arrested and in custody as soon as possible so nobody else gets hurt.
Yes, no, indeed. What happens after you make an initial report to the police? So we said that the police will then make a decision as to whether they will arrest the individual, and I know we've got other questions that are going to cover sort of what I'm about to say, but for those of people that are out there that worry, this is my word against somebody else's, and the police might not believe me. I mean, you, as a criminal QC, probably see that often.
Well, sexual offences are one of those offences where, more or less in every case, it's in close quarters that it happens, other people aren't there, and there's only 2 witnesses to it, the perpetrator and the victim.
Yes.
So never let that be an obstacle to reporting. What's most important is that you set out what happened to you as clearly as you possibly can.
Yes.
And as I've said, you may not recall everything. Trauma affects people, but all you can do is do your best to recall it in the order as best possibly you can.
Absolutely. And what about if somebody is worried that, well, hold on, this happened 3 months ago, 3 years ago, 30 years ago. You know, you read these things in the papers, and I know that's a very big question because it just depends. There's a lot that it's based on. So if some time has passed, and let's just say months rather than years, you know, don't let that put people off.
Absolutely
right? Because
not.
people might think, well, what evidence do I have? Okay, I had some evidence then because of a scratch on my arm or a bruise on my leg. But don't let that put you off in terms of reporting it.
There are a huge amount of historical cases reported now.
There's lots in the press at the moment.
Certainly are.
In America going on.
Absolutely. And it's very common now up and down the country in Crown courts for there to be cases where the allegations date back 20, 30, 40 years. And they're prosecuted, they're tried, and convictions can be secured.
Yes.
So never let the age of the allegation prevent you from reporting. The issue is you have to have made the decision yourself that you want to go through with the report, which is why it's important to understand what's going to happen to you.
Yes.
When you report.
Yes.
So once you've reported to the police, they're likely to take you to what they call a comfort suite. They're rooms that are dedicated for victims of rape and serious sexual assault.
In police stations?
Not always in police stations.
Right.
They're specialist suites. They're made, in effect, to try and make you feel more at ease. So you're not within the confines necessarily of the usual police station witness interview rooms. And so they're more peaceful. And the idea is to try and put you at your ease, because you're going to be talking about things, obviously, that are very personal.
Yes.
and often to a stranger, an officer you've never met before. But the important thing to know is that you will be dealt with by a dedicated officer who's specially trained. And they're called SOIT officers, so they're Sexual Officer Investigative Technique Trained Officers,
Wow.
SOIT for short. And they will be your dedicated officer who will be there throughout the gathering of the evidence from you. And they are well used to dealing with people who've been through these types of experiences and reported these crimes, and they know best how to get the evidence from you.
And what if I need a medical examination? I mean, that's another big question, isn't it? And can you say, well, I'd rather have a lady, female officer, or I'd rather have a male officer. You might be a man reporting a sexual assault and you feel more comfortable with another male. What comes with that? Because that's a big, that's very private to you in terms of what's going to happen. It's embarrassing. It can be embarrassing. It can perhaps maybe feel shameful. What if that has to happen? Who decides that has to happen or not?
Well, obviously getting medical help as soon as possible is the wise thing to do for many reasons, let alone the forensic side. Obviously issues such as pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, you need to be medically examined if that type of sexual assault has taken place. But obviously, if a crime's to be investigated, the sooner a forensic medical examination can take place, the better. Now, in relation,
gather evidence, obviously, as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So try not to wash or change your clothes, because that may destroy forensic evidence. If you've reported the crime to the police, they're likely to take you to a specialist centre.
Straight away.
Absolutely. Yeah. The one in London is called The Haven. And they've got a number of sites around London, and they're specialist centres simply set up for the victims of rape or serious sexual assault. And they've got specially trained doctors and nurses, and their role is first and foremost your emotional and physical needs. And they've got a huge background of knowledge and support network to help you through the process.
Yes.
Whether you're male, whether you're female, whether you're young, whether you're old, they will have people on hand to assist you.
I mean, this is really eye-opening stuff, Gillian, because where would you read this stuff? Where would you find this stuff? I mean, yes, we can all say, well, there's lots of information on Google these days about everything, but this is not actually public knowledge, really. Yeah. That if you've been very unfortunate to suffer something like this, then there are specialist centres, specialist trained officers. You're in those type of hands, and just knowing that, just to know that exists, is a great comfort to begin with.
Absolutely. I mean, and let's not forget The Haven, for example. They've got their own website. It's HAVEN. Google it.
Yes.
And all the information comes up. You can see where they're based and the kind of support they can offer. And importantly, you can access that even if you don't report to the police. You can go direct to them.
So you can just turn up to this centre
and say,
knock the door and
absolutely.
Say, well, that's very interesting, isn't it?
So you don't have to have made the decision to report before you go and get that forensic medical examination.
Because that's just the forensic centre where you get the emotional, the physical support, where they gather evidence about it. That's very, very informative.
And you can make the decision to report after. But what you've done is get all of the forensics in before you've had to make that decision. And so it's good to know that. And
it's very good to know that.
And the staff there, for example, can take your clothes, just in the same way the police can. They can also refer you to counselling. They've got a whole system in place of support workers.
Through the NHS.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all run through one of the big hospital trusts here in London and around the country. And likewise, they can also refer you to other organisations. So, for example, there's a set of charities that support individuals as well. And you can also get what's called an IFSVAR, which is an independent sexual violence support worker. And again, you don't have to have reported to the police. They're independent individuals who are specially trained.
Another government-run funded organisation.
Absolutely.
Wow. So that could be an option if you didn't want to go to police for whatever personal reason you had, whether you had a fear of something, whether,
exactly.
You could go to these centres
Yep.
and report it to them, have it all documented, get the support, get the help that you need.
And make a decision about reporting afterwards if you want to. Wow. And the good part of the IFSFAR programme with these independent, specially trained individuals is that they can also advise you on the criminal justice system. So they can be your access in.
Because you could say, what if this happens in my situation? What if that happens? And they can then give you all the information you need, and then you can make an informed choice.
Absolutely.
What's right for you? What's best for you? Do you want to park it because maybe you're not feeling up to going to the police and dealing with all of that? Or do you want to go full force ahead in some shape or form?
Absolutely. And there's the same thing, victims support youth group as well for young people. They've got a charity called You & Co, which helps young victims and witnesses cope with the impact and effects of crime. Again, don't have to have reported it to access that assistance.
You see, this is all very, very informative stuff, because the general consensus or the basic knowledge would be that if you don't report something, it doesn't trigger off everything else. It doesn't trigger off the gathering of the evidence, the support maybe that you need, the help that you need. And to know that they're actually, and you're only mentioning a few here because, we've just started talking about this, that there's so many and so much support and help out there. And confidentially.
Absolutely.
That everything could be kept confidential. I think that's another key point.
Wherever you have all the things I've spoken of, where you're going to the Haven, you're going to counsellors, all of that is confidential. And so you can go there, speak to these individuals, and then make a decision about what you want to do. But if you've been to the Haven, they've got those forensic medical examiners there. They can seize your clothing, they can conduct the examination, take the swabs that they need, take the photographs, all in the same way as if you'd reported it to the police.
Would that information then go into your medical file at the GP, Gillian? I mean, that might sound like a silly question, but when we talk about medical examinations, writing down notes on your physical body, because generally when something happens to our bodies, you have a box somewhere, don't you, on a form that says, who's your GP? Can we send this information direct? Does that happen automatically? Can you opt for it not to? Or?
Well, certainly with the Haven, they will ask whether it wants to be part of your general medical records. Like all these things, it requires your consent as to how your medical records are used.
Right. No, very good. And then the next step to this is what happens if the decision is made to prosecute the offender.
So if you've reported and the suspect's been arrested, they will be interviewed, the evidence will be collated, and that evidence will then be passed to the Crown Prosecution Service, the CPS. They're a specially trained lawyer.
The police.
So the police pass it to the CPS. A specially trained lawyer will review all the evidence, and together with a second reviewing lawyer will decide if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. They'll decide the appropriate charges and also advise the police on what further evidence should be gathered. Now, the CPS have to make a decision which is fair, objective and independent. And when they do it, they follow what we call the Code for Crown Prosecutors. And that simply means to charge someone with a criminal offence, any criminal offence, prosecutors must be satisfied that there is sufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect of conviction and that prosecuting is in the public interest.
And they have the expertise to evaluate that, don't they? Because again, what springs to mind is somebody potentially saying, well, it's their word against mine. Perhaps they're a stronger figure in the public eye than I am, or they're a senior person in life than I am. Nobody will believe what I say versus what they've got to say. These sorts of questions could pop up for people in their minds. And, what do we say? What do we say to that?
I think the bottom line is, as I said at the outset of our chat, that the reality is in sexual offences, specifically rape, quite often it is one word against the other. And as I've said, that doesn't and should never prevent you reporting and or a case proceeding to trial if there is sufficient evidence there. All of it will be assessed along with the surrounding circumstances.
Yes.
And then a decision...
Independently, obviously,
Absolutely.
Independently to both people. And we have seen in the press over the years, unfortunately, lots of senior figures, lots of famous A-listers, B-listers, lots of listers, being charged successfully against individuals who are not on their ranking in life in terms of being as famous as them or as in the public eye as they are. So that's a great thing to draw comfort from, isn't it? To see
Absolutely.
that, people, it doesn't matter who you are, who they are, if this will be treated in an independent way to what the status in life is, how rich or poor the parties are, how famous or infamous they are. And that needs to be considered by somebody if they're
Absolutely.
in this kind of a position.
You shouldn't let any decisions, you shouldn't let your decision be made because you feel that they may be believed over you.
Yes.
The bottom line is, if you've had an experience like this, report it.
On any level.
On any level.
Yes, absolutely.
And if they make the decision to prosecute, then obviously we move to the next stage, which is the court stage. And if they don't make the decision to prosecute, first of all, it's important to note that doesn't mean you are being disbelieved.
That's a key point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it could be for various reasons that the police decide. One of them may be evidence. It could be various reasons, but that wouldn't necessarily stop you considering a private prosecution.
Same test, whether it's a private prosecution or the CPS, you still have to go through the evidential test and the public interest test. So actually it's the same
Right.
for both the private prosecutor and the CPS.
Who will evaluate?
So if you are unhappy about the decision not to prosecute your case, you have what's called a right to review. So there is now a victim's right to review scheme. So you are told within 5 days of a decision being made not to prosecute the reasons why the CPS are not proceeding to trial. Once you've gone through those reasons, if you look at the CPS website, you'll be able to see that there's various steps that you can take to lodge an appeal, in effect, against that decision not to prosecute.
Against the CPS's decision to say, sorry, we're not prosecuting this case.
Absolutely. And you can ask for it to be reviewed by another independent lawyer to say, in fact, was that the right decision? And if you've got an IVSVA, the IVSA, the Independent Violence, the support worker, they're going to be able to give you guidance on that process as well. There's also quite a lot of charities that assist victims of rape or sexual abuse in helping them go through the victim's right to review scheme. So, for example, there's a place called the Centre for Women's Justice, which also assists in that type of thing. So there's a lot of help out there.
There is a lot of help, isn't there? I mean, there's a lot of help in different ways, and they come in different forms, and they don't advertise these things maybe so robustly, although sometimes you go into, for example, a toilet and on the back door there's a victim support poster in the most random places.
And you'll find most of those charities will be able to refer you to the right charity if they're the wrong one.
Yes.
So often, even if you don't know who to contact, if you call one of the more prominently known charities, say what your situation is, they'll be able to give you the information to contact the right people to help you.
Yes. No, very, very, very informative stuff here. Okay, the next big question on our list, Gillian, is will I have to go into court and face the defendant now?
Indeed. Well, if the CPS recommend a prosecution, then obviously the police pass the file on, and at that stage you'll get a witness care officer. That officer is somebody who's responsible for your care and for keeping you informed as the case moves through the criminal justice system. Because when somebody is first charged with an offence, the first hearing will be in the magistrate's court.
Without you having to be there?
Absolutely. And so at that stage you don't attend. Depending on the seriousness of the case, it may then be sent to the Crown Court. So if it's an allegation of rape, for example, or a serious sexual offence, it will move to the Crown Court. Obviously, in the Crown Court is where you have a trial in front of a judge with 12 jury members. So they're members of the public, chosen at random to hear a case. So if the defendant pleads not guilty, that's when you go to trial. If, however, he pleads guilty, he or she, then at that time the position will be that you won't actually have to be a witness because they've accepted the offence.
Yes.
But that's not the end of it. You'll have the ability at that stage to write what we call a witness personal statement or a victim personal statement.
Yes, we hear that often actually in the press. You hear that term.
Indeed. And that's a statement where you can set out how the crime has affected you physically, emotionally, and whether it's left you feeling vulnerable or intimidated, and how it's impacted on those around you.
And the purpose of those is so that the judge can consider what type of sentencing.
Absolutely. It's all to assist the judge to determine the appropriate sentence. And if you want to, you can actually read your statement out yourself at the sentencing hearing.
And if you don't
want to, the prosecutor does it and deals with it on your behalf.
Right.
But you have that option.
Yes.
Because
this has more impact, they say.
I think the reality is with the judge, whether it's read or whether you, as the victim, read it, it's going to have the same impact. There's not a jury. But the difference is, for you as the victim, it can be, certainly from people I've come across when I've dealt with the prosecution of serious sexual offences, they've found it quite empowering. It sort of brings a closure to the process. For other people, it's too much. They don't want to do it.
Yes.
It's an entirely individual decision.
Personal decision.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But certainly the judge will have read it come what may, and it will be taken into consideration in the sentencing process.
Yes.
So that's what happens if it's a guilty plea. If it's a not guilty plea, then obviously we have the trial. Now, once you get to that stage, the SOIT officer, so the specially trained officer, is still there. If you've got the independent sexual violence a support worker, they're still there as well. They're on hand to support you. They will organise a court familiarisation visit. That's where they take you to court so you can look round before you go there for the day of your evidence.
Right.
So you're not walking into an unfamiliar environment for the first time on the day. Also, you'll get the opportunity to read your witness statement and refresh your memory from it in advance. And quite often now in sexual offences, in fact, the first account you give is video recorded.
Wow.
So what happens is when you go to that first comfort suite at the beginning, when the police officer asks you all those questions, it's done in a room that's got video recording.
Right.
And so not only...
For the purposes of the prosecution.
Absolutely. So what will then happen is that will stand as your evidence in chief. By that I mean you don't have to recount your the experience and the event again in court. It's already there. So that first account you give becomes your evidence in chief.
And what if you can't face the perpetrator, Gillian? You don't want to be in the courtroom, you don't want to look at them, you don't want to be in the same room as them?
Well, if you are the victim of rape or a serious sexual offence, the CPS can apply to the court for special measures. Now, if you're under 18 or the allegation's rape, they're automatic. And that basically means special measures are measures that are put in place to help you give your best evidence. So, for example, that pre-recorded video of your account, that gets to be played so you don't have to recount it all again. You can, for example, not go into the courtroom at all. You can, in fact, give your evidence over a TV link. So after the jury have watched your pre-recorded video, you don't come into the witness box. You stay in a room that's away from the courtroom.
Yes.
And you're linked into the courtroom through a TV screen, and the barristers cross-examine you over the link.
Yes.
And
yes.
so
you don't have to get up and go to court and be in the same room as the person that you're saying has done these terrible things.
Or if you don't want to see the defendant, and that's your main concern, you can have what we call screens, where they screen off the witness box so you can see the jury, you can see the advocate asking you the questions, but you can't see the defendant and he or she cannot see you.
Yes.
Now, from my experience, obviously, quite often you get victims come along saying, I want to be in the link room. And actually, when you get to court and they've been back into the courtroom and it's been explained to them that they won't be able to see the defendant and the defendant won't be able to see them, actually coming into the courtroom and being cross-examined facing the jury is very impactful. And often witnesses change their mind and say, I actually do want to go into the courtroom.
Because they've got this support around them.
Indeed.
The support is there from lots of different angles. You know, they've got their own barrister representing them. They've got
the barrister is there on behalf of the Crown Prosecution Service bringing the case, but of course they have their support workers there.
Yes.
And obviously they'll have a witness care as well, and you can have them come and sit behind you in court, so they're alongside you as a support to when you're giving evidence. And so the court now is much better set up to the needs of individuals who are in effect talking about very traumatic, very personal things in front of strangers.
Yes. Well, I mean, I guess what I'm saying when I say you've got the barrister there supporting you is they're fighting your corner, your case. They're saying there is a crime that's been committed here that you have reported, and they're fighting that for you.
Absolutely, and they're there to represent the case and get the best evidence from you. And they want to get that best evidence from you, which means you need to be in the best place to give it, which is why all of these special measures are now available.
Yes, I mean, it is really, really great stuff, isn't it?
It's changed hugely over the last 10 years. And let's not forget things like, for example, if you have special needs or you have some kind of mental health concerns, or you're very young, you can have other sorts of support. For example, you can have intermediaries. Intermediaries are individuals who are there to help a witness make sure that they can understand the questions being asked of them.
Yes.
And also in turn make sure what they say in response is actually understood by the court. So they help and assist in that way. So that's something that's a more recent...
And that can be massive. That can be really, really helpful, because being in a courtroom on its own, I mean, I love that environment, but I'm not the one on... My name's not on the paper, as I like to say. It can be incredibly intimidating. It could be, you know, there could be a whole host of feelings that go through you when you step into that environment, and it's such a contentious matter. You know, like you said, it's the most personal it's ever going to get. It can be the most frightening it may ever get. Also understanding everything that's going on is imperative. Look, I'm going to go over time because I have to ask you this last question, Gillian. I just feel it's so important, and to get it into this particular episode, and that is, will my name be made public and reported if a case is being prosecuted, whether they choose to prosecute it or not? Will it be public?
The answer is very simply no. If you are a victim of rape or serious sexual assault, you are automatically eligible for lifetime anonymity.
Wow.
Which means,
and I know there's been a lot of talk about having that lifted.
There's arguments about whether it should, how it should extend and in which circumstances it can be lifted. But the reality is, it's a lifetime automatic eligibility, and it is against the law for the media to use your name or give your details, or indeed anything.
Anybody. Yes,
anything
somebody,
that may,
a friend,
anything that could cause you to be identified.
Maybe somebody knows the perpetrator who said, "I'm going to name you and shame you."
Yep.
Unless
Absolutely.
you say, I would like to be named, I want
that
it
is
to
different.
Be there.
And
yes.
we've all seen individuals who, for many different reasons, want to say, I am the victim of rape because I have something to say about it.
Yes.
And those individuals
try to empower other people to come forward, to
whatever it may be.
Things.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And those individuals choose to put their names into the public arena.
Yes, but which is, I think, is incredibly honourable to even do that, because, you know, it's difficult enough. It must be so difficult to deal with it yourself anyway. And then to say, I will be so unselfish about this. I'll put my name out there. I'll let everybody know who I am, and to tell my story myself. It's huge. I mean, it's so admirable that you know.
I agree.
Someone does that. And what about if it's prosecuted and not successful? Will your name come out then?
No. Doesn't matter what the outcome is. So
yes, that's
the reality is,
I think that's a very, very important point for perhaps a lot of people, you know, because people might think, well, what about if it's prosecuted and it's not successful because the legal team on the other side was bigger and better and just got around it, and then can the perpetrator then go and put my name out because they weren't successfully prosecuted? Can they say, well, this is the person that wrongly accused me?
The reality is, as I've said, that you are entitled to that anonymity for life. And it's important to know that.
Oh, that's key. That's all we have time for, actually, Gillian. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's been so informative. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Don't forget to click and subscribe to our podcasts, and you can find us on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn by searching Get Legally Speaking. Also visit our website at getlegallyspeaking.com. Thank you very much for listening.